Asylum seekers from Eritrea could face being deported from Israel following running battles on the streets of Tel Aviv. The Israeli government will meet to discuss how to respond to Saturday's violence, in which 170 people were injured. The fighting was between exiled opponents and supporters of the Eritrean government. Paul Brennan is live for us in West Jerusalem. So, Paul, first up, was this so unexpected, do you think?
Well, we certainly knew about the tension between the two elements of the Eritrean community here in Israel. And the police say that they had given permission for two separate protests or two separate events to take place, with the promise from both sides that they would stay separate. But I think perhaps in hindsight, it was entirely predictable that violence would ensue. And what we saw in the end were unprecedented scenes. The ear-splitting bangs of stun grenades and the acrid smell of tear gas in Tel Aviv, as rival groups from Israel's Eritrean community engaged in pitched battles with rocks and clubs. Local people described it as being like a war zone. The catalyst for the violence, an event organised by the Eritrean embassy to celebrate the government of President Isaias Afwerki and 30 years of Eritrean independence. But Eritreans who have fled the country because of Afwerki's authoritarian rule are outraged.
Why did we run from our country? Because of this dictator. Why they are celebrating here today? Why did the Israeli police give them a permit to celebrate for this dictator? We are against this. Why am I here seeking asylum?
What is happening here is that dictator wants to do a festival. We are against this festival. We are not living a good life. He is creating chaos and problems for us. We are against him. We don't want a festival to take place here.
The result was fury and chaos. Police say they'd consulted both sides in the Eritrean community in recent days and were not expecting this intensity of violence. That assessment now looks seriously questionable. Casualties were taken to several different medical centres. Among the wounded, several described as seriously hurt and some critically ill. Dozens of police officers were also injured. There's been political reaction too. Members of Israel's right-wing coalition government blaming the High Court for what they said were decisions which facilitated the violence. Opposition members of the Knesset rapidly pointing the finger of blame back at the government. The demonstrators were finally dispersed after several hours, leaving behind blood-stained pavements and smashed-up shop windows, and a sense of simmering tension. Paul Brennan, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
The thing is, Paul, the tensions that you're talking about there are long-running, but also long ignored.
Indeed. I mean, the population, the Eritrean population here in Israel is around 20,000. That's 0.2% of the population, but their plight has been well known about and has been frankly brushed under the carpet by successive governments, not just this current government. They have a status within society, an official status of conditional release, which grants them really only basic rights, basic civil rights. But the political fallout from this particular incident in Tel Aviv on Saturday has been to increase the polarization within Israeli politics. We've had Prime Minister Netanyahu coming out on Saturday night issuing a statement saying the following. He and a ministerial team are going to look into the possibility of taking action, including deportation. Now, that's stopping short of outright deportation. We're going to look at the options. But from both sides of the divide, we've got the Finance Minister, Smotrich, saying the High Court is responsible for these riots. Culture Minister Zohar, the perpetrators must be punished severely and deported immediately. On the other side, opposition politicians blaming the government and government inaction for the violence. Opposition leader Yair Lapid, this government's promised to handle the immigration crisis, and instead chaos reigns. And Benny Gantz of the National Unity Party, the failure of the current government, and we need to formulate a long-term policy. So you can see it's essentially an extension of the kind of polarized, I hesitate to call it culture wars, that we have here in Israel at the moment with the Eritreans and their plight, because so few of them are granted asylum status. They're regarded as illegal infiltrators, is how even the government describes them, very, very marginalized and frankly caught in the middle.